Noah. The scene in The Walking Dead takes place when Noah and Glenn Rhee become trapped inside a building's revolving door after a supply run goes horribly wrong. Sirens and the sound of explosions draw a massive herd of walkers toward them. Within seconds, the hallway is completely overrun. Glenn and Noah struggle to hold the revolving door shut while pushing back against the walkers, pressing in from the other side. The pressure keeps building. The glass begins to crack. Glenn yells at Noah to keep moving and not stop pushing. Noah starts to panic. The walkers continue slamming against the glass, clawing and biting at it. The revolving door loses its balance. One of the walkers manages to squeeze through and bites Noah at close range. Glenn tries to pull Noah free, but Noah's body is already pinned between the walkers and the metal frame of the door. Within seconds, the herd swarms his entire body. Noah is still conscious as his face is pressed against the glass. Glenn watches everything from only a few feet away. The walkers begin biting into Noah's cheek and jaw. The skin on his face is torn away piece by piece. Noah screams as he desperately tries to shove the walkers back with his bare hands. Blood splatters across the glass. In his final moments, Noah stops struggling because his body is no longer strong enough to move. His eyes remain open as the walkers continue tearing into his head and neck. Glenn is forced to let go of Noah's hand and step back, watching helplessly as Noah is devoured alive right in front of him. Rorschach. Rorschach met his end at the conclusion of Watchmen. After learning about Adrian Veidt's plan, which had killed millions of people in order to force the world to abandon the threat of nuclear war, the remaining members of the Watchmen agreed to keep the truth a secret, so the fragile peace that had just been achieved would not fall apart. Rorschach was the only one who refused to accept that decision. He insisted on leaving Veidt's base and exposing the entire truth to the world. As he walked away from the base across the frozen landscape of Antarctica, Rorschach was stopped by Dr. Manhattan. As long as Rorschach remained alive, the truth would eventually come out. Even so, Dr. Manhattan gave him one last chance to turn back. But Rorschach refused. Without a trace of fear, Rorschach removed his mask and revealed his face. He chose death rather than betray the principles he had lived by. "Do it," were his final words. A moment later, Dr. Manhattan unleashed a blast of energy that struck Rorschach directly. The energy blast instantly destroyed his body. Rorschach was completely disintegrated. All that remained were bloodstains scattered across the snow and his iconic mask. Logan. Logan died after battling the transition forces and his own clone, X-24. His body was covered in wounds, his healing factor had weakened, and the adamantium inside him was slowly poisoning him. Throughout the movie, he was often coughing up blood. Even so, he kept trying to get Laura and the mutant children safely to the border. In the woods near the Canadian border, the transition forces finally caught up with them. Logan realized he was no longer strong enough to take them all on. He then injected himself with the green, mutant-enhancing serum. Within seconds, his strength surged back dramatically. He immediately charged straight into the enemy forces, brutally attacking them with his adamantium claws. Logan stabbed, slashed, and tore through the transition soldiers at close range. His fighting style was far more savage than before. Bullets kept tearing into his body, but he continued pushing forward while protecting the mutant children. The battle became even more chaotic when X-24 appeared. The clone possessed a younger body, a perfect healing factor, and Wolverine's strength in his prime. The two repeatedly slashed and slammed each other around in the middle of the forest. Every attack from X-24 was significantly more powerful. Logan gradually began running out of strength as the effects of the serum slowly wore off. The wounds across his body started failing to heal. In the final moments of the fight, X-24 charged straight at Logan and drove him into a massive broken tree trunk that jutted out like a giant wooden spear. The trunk pierced through Logan's chest and burst out through his back. Blood poured from the wound. He was still conscious, but his body could barely move. Laura then shot X-24 with an adamantium bullet, killing the clone. Once the threat was over, Logan collapsed to the ground beside Laura. His breathing became short and heavy. His eyes slowly lost focus. For the first time in his life, Logan's body could no longer heal itself. Laura held him as she cried. Logan looked at her and told her that this was what it felt like to have a family. Moments later, his breathing slowly came to an end. His face became peaceful, and his body lay completely still. At his funeral, Laura and the mutant children buried him in the forest. Laura then turned the wooden cross on Logan's grave into an X as a final tribute to Wolverine and the X-Men. Shireen Baratheon. Shireen was the daughter of Stannis Baratheon and Selyse Baratheon. She was known as a kind, intelligent girl who shared a close bond with Davos Seaworth. When Stannis' army became trapped in the freezing weather and began running out of supplies, Melisandre convinced Stannis that sacrificing royal blood could bring them victory. At first, Stannis refused, but his army's situation continued to grow worse. Many of his soldiers deserted the camp, and their food supplies were running low. Melisandre kept pressuring Stannis to make the extreme decision. In the end, Stannis agreed to the sacrifice. Shireen was led out of the tent without fully understanding what was about to happen. When she realized she was going to be used as the ritual's sacrifice, she became terrified and called out to both of her parents. She begged to be set free. Several soldiers looked visibly uncomfortable as they watched. Selyse initially supported the ritual alongside Melisandre and Stannis, but when the flames began to rise and Shireen cried out for her mother, Selyse started to panic. She tried to rush forward while screaming for the ritual to be stopped. The soldiers held her back, and by then the fire had already grown too large to put out. Shireen ultimately died in the ritual. When Davos later learned the truth, he was furious with Melisandre and realized that Shireen had become a victim of her own father's ambition for war. T-800. His metal body was covered with bullet holes and deep gashes from the previous battle. One of his arms had been destroyed. His internal systems were beginning to fail. Even so, he kept moving to protect John Connor and Sarah Connor. Inside the steel mill, the T-1000 continued hunting them while shifting its shape with its liquid metal body. The battle raged through industrial machinery, metal walkways, and pools of molten steel. The T-800 was repeatedly shot and slammed into heavy machinery. At one point, he took a devastating hit that temporarily shut down his systems completely. John believed the T-800 was finished. The T-1000 then approached them to eliminate its final targets. Just as all hope seemed lost, the T-800 suddenly came back online. With his body badly damaged and his movements noticeably slower, he grabbed a shotgun and repeatedly blasted the T-1000 until the liquid metal assassin began losing its stability. The T-800 then picked up a grenade launcher. His final shot struck the T-1000 directly, sending it falling into a pool of molten steel. The T-1000's body began melting, while constantly shifting into different forms before it was finally destroyed inside the furnace. After the threat was over, the T-800 explained that every piece of Terminator technology had to be destroyed. The last remaining problem was himself. As long as his body and processor still existed, Skynet could one day be created. John Connor immediately refused. He begged the T-800 not to leave. For the first time, their relationship truly felt like that of a father and son. Even so, the T-800 remained firm in his decision that he had to be destroyed. Standing beside the molten steel furnace with his body heavily damaged, the T-800 prepared for his final sacrifice. Sarah operated the industrial chain lift, slowly lowering him into the molten steel. John cried as he held onto the T-800's metal hand. The Terminator told him that he finally understood why humans cry, but that he could never do it himself. As his body slowly descended, the molten steel gradually swallowed his legs and torso. Just before his head disappeared beneath the surface, he raised his thumb in one final farewell to John Connor. A few seconds later, the T-800's entire body melted into the molten steel, and his systems shut down forever. James Bond. James Bond met his end during the climax of No Time to Die while carrying out his final mission on an island that served as Lucifer Safine's headquarters. During his showdown with Safine, Bond managed to shoot him several times, sending him to the ground. But before he died, Safine fired back and struck Bond with several gunshots. The wounds left Bond badly injured, but he was still able to stay on his feet. As Bond approached his fallen enemy, Safine touched him with a hand that had been contaminated with deadly nanobots. The nanobots were specifically programmed to kill Madeline Swan and her daughter, Matilda Swan. From that moment on, Bond realized he would never be able to touch the people he loved again. Bond forced himself back to the control room. He made sure all of the missile silo doors remained open, so the incoming missiles would not fail to destroy the base. Once every system was locked into place, Bond made his way back to the surface of the island. Over the radio, Bond said his final goodbye to Madeline. He revealed that Matilda was his daughter and asked Madeline to take care of their child. He calmly looked up at the sky as the missiles began slamming into the island. His body was swallowed by the massive explosions. The relentless barrage destroyed the entire facility and claimed Bond's life. Deputy Nick. Deputy Nick suffered one of the most horrifying deaths in Bone Tomahawk. After the sheriff's posse finally located the cave where the troglodyte cannibals were holding their captives, Nick had already been captured and bound, completely helpless. In front of Franklin Hunt and the others, who had also been taken prisoner, Nick was dragged out of his cage by two troglodytes. They stripped away his clothing until his upper body was exposed, then flipped him upside down so he was hanging with his head facing the ground. His legs were tightly bound, leaving him unable to move or fight back. One of the troglodytes then grabbed a stone tomahawk and began striking Nick's body. Several brutal blows crushed parts of his body, causing him to scream in agony. After that, the cannibal picked up another sharp weapon and began splitting Nick's body open from the groin upward. As he hung upside down, his body was slowly torn apart into two halves. Blood poured onto the floor of the cave. The execution unfolded right in front of Hunt and the other prisoners. Once Nick's body had been completely split in two, both halves fell separately onto the cave floor. John Coffey. John Coffey died at the end of the Green Mile after going through with his execution in the electric chair, even though Paul Edgecombe and the prison guards eventually discovered that he was innocent of murdering the two young girls. Coffey chose to accept his sentence because he had grown tired of living in a world filled with hatred and cruelty. On the day of his execution, Coffey was led out of his cell in handcuffs. Unlike the other inmates, he walked calmly without putting up any resistance. His face was filled with sadness, while the guards escorting him looked heartbroken, knowing they were about to execute an innocent man. When he arrived in the execution chamber, Coffey was seated in the electric chair. His chest, arms, waist, and legs were tightly strapped down so he couldn't move. As they prepared to place the hood over his face, Coffey pleaded with them not to use it. Ever since he was a child, he had been terrified of the dark and wanted to see the faces of the people around him one last time. Paul honored his request. The electrodes were then attached to his head and leg. Once every procedure was complete, Paul gave the signal to begin the execution. The switch was pulled, and a powerful surge of electricity immediately coursed through Coffey's body. His muscles tensed violently as his body shook from the electric current. Thin wisps of smoke began rising from his head, while the electricity continued flowing until his body gradually lost all signs of life. When the current was finally shut off, Coffey no longer moved. The prison doctor checked for a pulse and pronounced him dead. The guards could only stand there in silence, some of them fighting back tears after witnessing the execution of a kind-hearted man who had been condemned for a crime he never committed.